Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to the Build Room, and in this week's episode we are working on this Swiss cheese RA28 Celica. It's Swiss cheese not only because of the color of that etch primer, but also because it has got a heap of rust in it at the moment. So we're going to be all about body work. We are going to be cutting out the rust, plating it all up, and filling some holes. So stick around and check it out. All right, so the car's pretty much where we left it last week, except we've got it up on jack stands and I've pulled the wheels off. But yeah, there is a fair amount of rust work that needs to happen on this thing. We're probably gonna go over a couple of episodes here. I'm unlikely to pull the screens today, which means we're not gonna be fixing this sort of rust here and all the rust that's in the bottom of the cowl. But what I am gonna focus on is doing some of the things like the rust in the bottom sill here. And if we look closely, this is just silver paint all along here. There's, there's a fair amount of metal in here. It's not too bad, but there is definitely big pieces of rust. So we'll grind all this way and see what we're working with. Also gonna run through and do things like these badge holes. So around the car, there's a heap of little holes like that need to be filled up. There's a couple of areas on the car that are gonna be tricky. So there's an area up here to repair. If I just, a couple of little spots there. Those actually do go through and they've kind of been filled up because they've got a lead area from about there across. So trying to fix this without melting that lead will be difficult. I'm probably gonna have to grind a section of it out and then we'll fill that up later. Obviously, working with lead, just be careful around that stuff. You don't want to be grinding it back and inhaling it. There's more badges and things like that on the rear. We also have the rust underneath the fuel flap here. This is a tricky one. Obviously, I don't want to weld that close to a filler neck for a fuel tank. I think what I'm going to try and do is just pop that down and into the actual body of the car, get everything nicely sealed up in here, and then just weld around there as best I can, making sure that we don't have any fuel fumes. There's also an area at the top here that I need to fix. That looks like it's gone through both skins, so we'll just be cutting a section out here and replacing that. Also got to fill up these on the A pillar because I'm not going to have an aerial on this car, considering I haven't even hooked up the radio. And you know, on this side you can see a little bit better what we're dealing with the cowl. Not going to pull the windscreen in this episode, as I said, because we're not going to have time. But yeah, I'll try to get through as much of the rest of the stuff as I can. But to be honest, the good thing about this is we've just had it in bare metal, so we know where all the rust is. And quite frankly, there's not a lot here that we need to be scared of. It is gonna take a lot of time though. I'm not kidding myself there. There's some tricky bits of rust and there might be multiple layers that we're gonna have to get through. So yeah, we've got the MIG there. I'm gonna bust out the grinders and probably do this for like a little bit of a production line, but I will just check in at key points along the repair and show you guys how we're doing. And we'll run somewhat of a montage so you can see a little bit of the detail. So yeah, let's get into it. So first things first, we've got a purple 3M stripper disc and we're gonna get rid of all that 2K epoxy etch so that we've got a good surface to weld to. I started on the dog leg, and if you look closely here, you can see all that silver paint below. It's not metal, and you'll see that as I strip it off, and there is a heap of bog underneath it. I did this as a sneaky thing to get this car registered, so I didn't want to bother cutting that rust out when I was going for rego, so what they can't see, they can't ping you for. That's the bottom line. And at the end of the day, there's not enough rust here to be structural, so it wasn't a safety concern either. While I was doing this, I did notice a bit of sand dropping down, so I took the bungs out and I put a screwdriver up through the drain hole, and yeah, look what's coming out. There's a lot of sand in here for some reason, really fine stuff. We'll get into that soon. For now, I'm gonna start protecting glass and welding up holes. Now, this is probably not the best way to do this. If you're doing this properly, you're supposed to cut out a larger area than the hole, put a small piece of metal in and weld it up. This method, however, is a lot faster. You've just got to be careful not to overheat the panel you're welding to. This is sped up obviously, but you'll notice I am cooling it down and I'll keep cooling it throughout the process. And then, you know, once you grind it back, it looks pretty good. There's probably a little bit more warping here, but it was fine for me. I just missed the fourth hole. So pop that out, weld that one up. And while I was doing that, I did also notice there was some pitting in the other three holes. They weren't through to the other side or anything like that, but I figured while I was here, I might as well tack those ones up as well and run them down flat again. And then I go over it with a strip it disc again, just to give it a keying, so I can just to check that it's all nice and neat. And then there's the holes on the back of the trunk lid. Same process as before. I did blow through the middle one a fair bit, but you know, with enough MIG wire and enough time on your hands, you can fill up pretty much anything on these things. One other thing is just be careful when you're using these flap discs. They're really, really aggressive and can go through the sheet metal pretty easy. After this, I'm going to skip the fuel tank and we're going to head up to the area above the driver's door. This one, you'll notice I'm just taking out a reasonable area to make sure that there's no rust either side of it that's going to pop through later. Covering the windows again and obviously the interior, and just going to cut through this. I've already got a plate made. I've copper primed the back of it. Inside here, using the Dremel so that I don't ruin the trims. It's a bit hard to get a big grinder into some of this stuff, but clearing out all of the old rusty stuff. And then that second layer there, it's not badly damaged enough for me to bother taking that out as well. So wire brush, a little bit of rust converter, then some copper primer, and then we'll get the patch in. But for now, I'm gonna stop talking and we'll leave you guys to listen to the montage. With that bit sorted, it was then time to move on to this bottom area here. So I have cut off the outer layer already. It was pretty messed up. That is the back of it. So you can see there's a lot of rust in there, and the overlap here gets really tight, and it gets tight here as well. So we've rusted through in that area. So what I did was, before I cut this outer section off, I pretty much determined I was going to replace it from the join here all the way to the back. So I broke out the bending brake, bent a piece of 0.9mm steel up just for this outer angle here. And then what I needed to do was make the scallop and then the outer lower curve. So this scallop section here is actually quite curved. Old school stuff, I just looked around the garage until I could find something that was about the right size that I could beat on. And what I actually used was the handle from my trolley jack. So with the bending brake taking care of the main bend, then I could lay it over the jack handle and just take my time with a hammer to really beat that in and get the curve right. Then once I was happy with that, I could then work on the bottom section, which, to be honest, the easiest way to do that was to start off just by bending it by hand. And then I threw one of my dollies in the vise and tapped it, and that got it to sort of 80%. And then to finish it off, I broke out the planishing hammer and it just evened out the curve so that there's really not too many lumps. And that ended up with this thing here. I needed to just cut a little notch out to fit around the window. But yeah, we have this single piece of metal. It's not overworked or thin or anything like that. It's got a bit of surface rust, so I'll need to clean up and I'll need to prime the back of it. But it really fits in quite nicely into place through there. I did clearance that corner too much, but we can make that up. It's a MIG. But yeah, pretty happy with that result. That's pretty much spot on where I need it to be. This, however, is only the icing on the cake. It's only the outer layer, so we do have to deal with a couple of things on the inside. That bit, as I said, was rusted. I've also made just a teeny little patch panel to go in on that. This is light surface rust. It's a bit hard to tell the difference on camera, but in person, this is heavily pitted through here. And then all of this area is really quite good. And then this area here, there is a self-tapper there. I have no idea why. So somehow there is a self-tapper from the back of this section. We'll do some investigation there. And then there's this piece to replace. That's gonna be one that's a little bit tricky to do super neat, but it also doesn't really need to be super neat. So I am just gonna get in there, cut as much of the rust out, put a plate in that roughly resembles that, and just make sure that it's nicely sealed up so that we can't get water ingress through there to rust out the panel. And I'll also go in from the back and put some seam sealer on it a little bit later, just to make sure that we don't end up rusting from the outside in on that one either. And one really weird thing with this was the amount of sand. I mean, if I put my finger in here, the sand starts basically as soon as I put my finger in, maybe about that high. So from there down is just full of sand. And it's a really weird sand. I mean, you can see how much of it came out of there. I had a screwdriver in there that I was wiggling and it was just more and more was coming out. I mean, I can't really be 100% sure how it got in there, but the bottom line is it is in there and I've got to do something about it. Hopefully the entire rail is not full of it, although I need to cut the front of the rail off so I'll be able to get a good view down through here as well. And if there is sand all through it, we'll vacuum it out. So yeah, I feel like I've done a lot of the hard work in bending up this panel already. So I'm hoping this won't take too much longer. So yeah, let's crack on, and fingers crossed this doesn't have anything scary under it when I cut that bit out either. And now that we can see inside, there is a heap more rust and weird sand, so I thought I'll give it a good blowout. When I got to this back section, oh my God, just dust after dust after dust. It was horrible, and I couldn't really see it because of that plate. So I figured time to take off that part of the skin too. I'll weld this piece back on. I'm not going to replace it. It's in reasonable condition, but behind it, the mother load. Now I don't know what that is. Maybe it's mud that's just sat there for so long that's turned into wood. And remember, I've stuck a screwdriver into this and put the air blaster through, so that would have been chock-a-block full with all of this stuff. There's just so much in there. So I made the call, I scraped it out, got it as cleaned up as I possibly could, and then broke out the sandblaster. So yeah, watch me make a absolute mess of the entire garage with a sandblaster, and I'm just hoping at this point that the results are going to be worth it. All right, and with everything cleaned up, it's time for some rust converter. This is the standard stuff that I use, the phosphor-based one, and then I washed this out really well with water, which led to surface rust, which I knew was gonna happen, but then we're gonna use this stuff, KBS Rust Blast, often known as Smurf Piss. This is gonna take off that top layer of rust, but more importantly, it's there to prep the surface for the next piece. So you can see the yellow staining here. That is the phosphorus coating on the top. That's fine, that's supposed to be there, so that we can then throw a whole bunch of KBS Rust Seal on. So this is like pour 15, and I'm gonna just smash this in with a brush to basically coat every surface that I can possibly get to. In between those panels is really hard, but it goes in, it dries off. You can see I've fixed that end piece as well. It all looks good, got plenty through there. So now it's time to get that copper coated panel back in, and then it is on with the tack welding and grinding show. It's dried overnight, so it is super hard now. I'm actually not too unhappy with the way it's come out. There are some areas where I've got some runs and bits and pieces, which doesn't matter through here, but here where we've got one piece of metal lapping on top of the other, I think this is probably going to push it out. So I'll have to grind some of this back. I'll try not to go through the paint if at all possible, but the bottom line is I have to take some areas off here anyway to do some spot welds to hold this on. So I'm not particularly too worried about it. And on the back piece, that's also coated and it's dried overnight. It's quite thick, this coating, so you know, nothing is ever going to rust through that anytime soon, I don't think. Certainly not before there's rust elsewhere in the car. I left the edges off this time just to make sure that while I'm trying to get really good welds, especially along the top here, I figure copper priming down those sides will stop this stuff contaminating the weld, and hopefully it'll be a little bit better. It does mean, you know, obviously there is a weak link in any chain, and the weakest link is going to be the areas that I've welded where the copper primer gets too hot and burns off. We've looked at copper primer before. It does hold up pretty well, and being that we have such a long piece of metal here, I'm gonna have to be really careful not to warp this panel. So I won't be putting too much heat in it, so I'm hoping it's gonna be okay. So yeah, I'm gonna copper prime this now. I'll clean all of this up with the grinder. Obviously the outer faces, I'll be taking the paint off, so I've got bare metal to weld to, and the bits for the spot welds here, and we'll get this outer piece back in and see what we end up with. All right, so those tacks are going in pretty well. I made sure to line it up properly before I started. Now I'm getting the tacks in on this panel at the top, and this wasn't actually 100% straight to start off with. So there's a couple of areas where I just needed to make little tweaks. And then what I was using here was just a piece of metal tacked on so I could pull the panel to where I wanted it to go. Normally you would say, you know, perfect world, you want your panel to line up 100%, tack it in with no stress on it. But the bottom line is, when the panel you're tacking it to isn't straight, you don't want to go in crooked either. So yeah, all the tacks are in place. The gaps are pretty good, except for that big area that I've got to fill up. Again, it's a MIG, no problem. So this is me trying to tack this top section out without having too much warpage. So I'm just checking it a lot when I first start, making some tweaks where I need it with the hammer. And yeah, you'll notice I'm skipping a section of tacks each time. So tacking every second lot and then air blasting it down to keep it really cool in between. And yeah, it's just a case of being methodical here. Down the end, you will see me throw a lot of metal in towards to fill up that gap basically. There, I'm not too worried about the heat because there's so many angles and elements of structure there that we're not going to get warping on that corner. You just got to make sure you don't run that heat down too far and affect the rest of the panel. But yeah, that's what the blowgun's for. This is sped up 10 times. So, you know, this took probably 20 minutes just to weld this top panel here. So a lot of time taken, but I think the result's worth it, which I'll show you in a sec. So here's the finished lot. The tacks aren't too neat, but you know what? They don't need to be. Don't stress about your tacks if they're not particularly neat. You're gonna grind them off anyway. And then if we look down here, what I want to show you guys is here, I've done spot welds, and then this run up here, look at the heat marks on either side. So I stacked these tacks all the way up here because it's a double layer of metal, it's not going anywhere, but you can see the difference. So see the burn marks on here are maybe a mil to maybe 2 mil, and then here they're sort of 5 to 6 mil out. That's the difference in heat. And as a result, this panel is really almost perfectly straight. It's fantastic. I couldn't be happier with it. Now I've got to grind all those off. And again, 40 grit flap disc, air dusting in between, and using the 50 grit, I think it is, roll lock, just to get the detail stuff in the end. And this is what we ended up with. So that is raw. You can barely see the join. And everything looks pretty good. The bottoms are not as neat. I think there was some contamination from the KBS on that, but still perfectly reasonable. I'm very happy with it. All sanded back, you can see, very nice and smooth. And I think that's a great repair that's gonna last a long time. All right, so we are done for the day, and I'm pretty happy with the progress there. It didn't get as much done as I would have liked. I didn't do the rust under the fuel filler cap because I think that's going to be a much bigger job than I originally thought. So I figure I'll leave that for when I've got some really good time to dedicate to it. Also didn't fill up the antenna holes on the A-pillar because they're so close to the stainless steel trim on the door and the windscreen that I figured I'll wait until I pull the screens out, get those trims out of there and not risk damaging them in the process of fixing stuff up. Now the main thing for today that I want to get done was that rear dogleg, and that is all done. I did the old Bodyman's trick of 40 grit on the dyno braid and sanding it all down so it looks a bit smooth. And to be honest, it actually looks pretty decent. Now, based on my experience today, there's a couple of tips that I would give you. First thing is, when you're welding around the glass, make sure you cover it up. You will have metal that sits on that glass, it'll melt into it and it'll ruin the glass. So yeah, don't do that. This glass is getting hard to find in good condition. The second thing is take your time and try to put as little heat into those panels as you can, especially when you're welding large flat areas. Now I showed you the difference there between the tacking and then the cooling versus just stack tacking on top of each other. There is a big difference in heat into the panel, and you will see an improvement if you take the time. Final thing is be very careful when you're grinding down your welds. So the 40 grit flap disc on the grinder can actually put a lot of heat into those panels, so you might find you need to cool it as you go. And then the next thing to be careful of is stop grinding when you get down to the original metal. It's very, very tempting to try and grind out all the imperfections because you'll have like little low spots where the weld has pulled slightly lower than the panels either side. Well, maybe you don't if you're a great welder, but if you're a welder like me, it's gonna happen. You've got to have enough discipline to stop grinding and just deal with the fact that there will be some areas that don't look neat. But as soon as you put a skim of bog over them, you're never gonna see them again. Life will be good and you won't have a paper thin panel that is gonna rust through at 1,000,000 miles an hour or just be structurally weak. So yeah, they're my tips for today. We have probably got a couple more episodes at least of cutting out and repairing rust on this thing. I'm gonna try and space it out with some other episodes. One of the cool things we've got coming up that I think will interest you guys is we are gonna do some wheel fitment on this. So it's really hard to get wheels and tires for these nowadays. Modern wheels are usually 5 stud now because cars are getting bigger and bigger. And what is 4 stud and 4x1, 14x3 tends to skew towards front wheel drive, which means it's very difficult to get the right offsets for a rear wheel drive car. In addition to that, 13-inch, 14-inch and 15-inch wheels are not easy to find nowadays either. The majority of cars are 16 inches and up. It's even getting hard to find tires for those smaller wheels. So I have got a set of modern wheels, which you may love or you may hate. You have every right to tell me how you feel on that one. But we are gonna see how we can fit them to this. And I think the interesting thing for you guys will be, firstly, whether you like the wheels on the car, but secondly, you'll know the offsets that I've got, how I got them to fit, and then you can make a decision on whether that kind of wheel is right for your project, or you're gonna focus on buying a classic set of wheels from the 70s and 80s and 90s and fitting them and finding smaller tires for them. So yeah, that should be interesting. Also, in the back of my mind, I'm really thinking about the future of Violet Crumbles here. I'm pointing off screen because that's where she is. I had a look at some of the old videos on that and it just reinforced to me how much work I put into that thing. It's really gonna kill me to have to cut the roof off it. So I'm thinking we need to do something with this. I'm still interested in hearing what you guys think I should do with that. Put your comments down below and in the next couple of episodes, we'll probably finalize that and I'll let you guys in on the plan. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the day. Just leaving us with the standard stuff. If you're new to the channel, I'm gonna put the full Violet Crumble series up here and YouTube's gonna put some other content down here. Other than that, just wanna say thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.